the love of Her Eminence Lady Fatima, please recite one loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
For the love of the awaited Saviour of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
We have a request for a Surah Al-Fatiha for the family of Marhum Sayyid Muhammad Ahmed Naqwi, for himself, Marhum Sayyid Muhammad Ahmed Naqwi, and for the Marhumeen of all of the family of Dr. Fatima Naqwi, and also for Fawziya Marhuma Fawziya Shamim, and for Marhum Iftikhar Ali. Surah Al-Fatiha, please. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Awaited Saviour of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our fifth night in which we are discussing the rise and fall of civilizations and the particular challenges to Muslim and Western modernity. In our previous discussions, we have looked at the different outcomes, or the potential outcomes of communities and civilizations. We have looked at the way in which there was the rise and the downfall of the Muslim community at the time of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. We also began the discussion, how do we study communities? How do we study civilizations? And we looked at a number of different scholarly opinions, both from within the Muslim world and external to the Muslim world, looking at civilizations generally and looking at the Muslim civilization specifically. We've looked, for example, at the ideas of Arnold J. Toynbee. We've looked at the ideas of Robert Kaplan. Yesterday we also looked at some of the ideas of His Eminence Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Taqi al-Mudarrisi, Marja from the holy city of Karbala. And the idea was that for us to be able to reflect on our own communities and our own countries and our own civilizations and ask ourselves, how are we doing as a civilization? Are we teetering on the edge of destruction? Are we seeing a positive, strong future for our own communities, for our own countries, for our own civilizations? How do we judge that? What are the measurements that we can use to be able to understand that? One of the things that we mentioned yesterday, and again to emphasize for tonight, that we stated that if we want to organize our community, we can query, how do we know whether the community is in a strong position? At one level we can say, people come for the majlis. But we also know that when it comes to Muharram, the majlis is very popular. You don't need to encourage people so much to come, because it's the month of Muharram. People themselves will come, even if you don't see them for the rest of the year. Is that a measurement for the strength of the community? No. But for example, if we see that the youth do not come for the entire 365 days or 355 days of the rest of the year, but only come for the last few nights, then we can see we're in a troublesome position. That in terms of the demographics, in terms of handing over the community to the next generation, it won't be there. Or for example, we know at the moment that there is a survey about the mental health of the community. You can have 100% attendance, but if 90% internally are not strong in believing in God, or do not find value in their religion, in the way in which it's being practiced, then the demographics show one thing, but the internal elements of the community show another thing. So we need to understand, is our community strong or not? Where are we going in the next 10, 20 and 50 years? And so some of the questions we've been asking allow us to be able to pose that question for ourselves. Yesterday, we also asked the question, to which community do I belong to? And the reason as to why that question is so important to our own generation and so important to our own civilization is that there is identity politics at the very center of our own civilization. Who am I? Am I Shia? Am I Muslim? Am I Shia Muslim or am I Muslim Shia? Am I a British Muslim and an Iraqi British Muslim? Am I a human Muslim? What am I? Because all of these different identities can in some ways conflict, and often our youth as well internally, but also the external world is challenging us and asking, do you have British values or do you have your Muslim values? Are you one of those that wants to shoot their Islamic ray guns? Or are you one of those that's going to contribute to our country and make Britain better? Are you Britain first or humanity first? And so this is a central question, because without understanding who we are, we don't know which civilization we represent, which community we represent. Yesterday, we went through certain ayat, and we saw, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, He has named you Muslims. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has called us to be Muslims. So we do have an identity that is given to us from our theology. We also saw the ayat yesterday where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that mankind were ummatan wahida, that we were once one people. But when differences came in, we split. And the reason what differences came in that split us were our jealousies, our envies, our desire for materialism, our greed for wealth. And so we used religion, we used prophethood, we used imamat in order to divide us as opposed to uniting us, in complete contradiction to the concept of Islam and religion itself. As a result, the more we became divided and the more we decided to put stock into these divisions, the more we became consumed by these secondary identities. We no longer saw ourselves as human first. We see ourselves as anything other than human first. Now, in a post-enlightenment period, especially since the freedoms have come in, the more freedom we've got, the more different identities have been created. It's interesting that for many people in this world, their primary identity will be their football club. And their travel will be based on their football club. Their allegiance will be based on their football club. Their violence will be based on their football club. For another person, for example, it might be that their primary identity is feminism. Another person, for example, it will be their color. They'll say, I am black, and so my primary identity is seen through my blackness or my whiteness. All of these different multiple identities are created, especially when so much freedom is given to people. So tonight, inshallah, we want to conclude that question that we started yesterday. What identity do I have first? And when do I have the different identities? When should I call myself Shia first? When should I call myself Muslim first? When should I call myself human first? When should I call myself British first? Is there a contradiction between them? At what time do I put myself forward? The second half of tonight's discussion will follow on from that question, and it will ask us a very important question. What happens when collectively, with that identity, we lie about our own histories? So now I say, I am Muslim, or I say I am American, or I say I am British. Once I've got that identity, what happens when I consciously lie about my own past, and I allow my own past to be riddled with lies and cover-ups? And the reason why we talk about this tonight is because we need to talk about what's happening in Europe and the imminent downfall and destruction of Europe as a collective identity. Going back towards nationalism, going towards supremacy, and going towards the annihilation of minorities again, just like it did from the 1930s to 1945. And all the good work that was achieved post-1945 is being taken away, one country by one country. We need to see what is happening in Europe in order to ensure that we stabilize Europe as best as we can, inshallah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. What identity do you hold? And why do you hold that identity? And why do you hold that identity first? Are you supposed to be Shia or British Shia? And think about that from the context of the entire continent or the Western Hemisphere, especially in certain places where it's more difficult to practice your Islam. Are you French Muslim or Muslim French? This is a question that is often posited to French Muslims in order to back them into the corner to state your national identity should come first, meaning that your loyalty is first and foremost to the state. Your loyalty is not to God. Why? Because in this state we are a secular, an ultra-secular state. We do not place God at the helm of our ethics or at the helm of our law. The national identity and goals are at the helm of your ethics. So now if they come into conflict, which one do you go to first? Few authors have taken the time to write on this from the Muslim world and to really tackle and deal with this question that is a burning question in the modern day society, especially as rampant white nationalism takes over Europe again. One of the scholars who has tried to deal with this is by the name of Tariq Ramadan. I'm sure many people here have heard of Tariq Ramadan and maybe even heard some of his lectures or seen some of his books. Tariq Ramadan has an interesting book which is called To Be a European Muslim. What does it mean to be a European Muslim? Now immediately the title itself is very interesting because it raises the question that there is a specific identity and practice for a European Muslim as opposed to something else. So am I a British Muslim, a French Muslim, a European Muslim, or am I a human Muslim? By virtue of the fact of the title of the book, Tariq Ramadan is postulating that there is a particular type of Islam that has to accord with the European civilization. Immediately it goes back to the question that we were asking last night and the night before. Well, where does Europe begin and where does Europe end? What makes you think that Europe has to end here and not end here? And as a result, your whole context and concept of what is a European Muslim changes. So Tariq Ramadan doesn't deal with these questions very well. However, he does pose something that is very normative and very traditional, in which he says that for the Muslim, you are able to have multiple identities. Wasn't it true that some Muslims had an identity based upon their own tribe, their ancestral tribe? You would be called At-Tamimi from Banu Tamim, you would be called Ad from this and this tribe and that tribe. So at the time of Islam, it accepted that you belong to a particular tribe, but it also expected you to be a Muslim. In this context, Tariq Ramadan says the same way Islam allowed for you to still have your tribal identity, in today's context of nation states, you can also have your national identity as well. There's no harm in being a British Muslim or a French Muslim or American Muslim, and so on and so forth. However, he raises the point, and he says the difference between national identity and an Islamic identity is very simple. National identity is based on geography. It's about where. Whereas the Muslim identity is about how you act with people, how you engage with your belief system. So in theory, there should never be a conflict between these two, because there's no problem in you living in a geographical place and say my identity comes from this geographical place, but my Muslim identity, my theological identity, asks me about different questions, not about where I'm from, how I am as a human being, what I believe in as a human being. And so there shouldn't be a conflict. But, he says, if there is a conflict, if your nation state asks you to do something haram, asks you to do something against God, then obviously God comes first. And that should be obvious to anyone. But however, sometimes it does get lost, because people sometimes, even Muslims, start to put their national identity ahead of their own Muslim identity. Okay. The real question now is, does this solve our issues when it comes to identity? The answer is no, it doesn't. Why? For a number of reasons. He states there should be no conflict between your national identity and your Muslim identity. Imagine now we juxtaposed the concept of a national identity with the ummah identity. What happens when you have your ummah, your Muslim ummah, asking you to do something, and you have another group of people asking you to do something? Should there be a conflict between ummah and mankind? Do you put the interest of your ummah, be it the Shi'i ummah or the Muslim ummah, do you put that ahead of the interest of mankind or not? Should there ever be a conflict? This is a question that Tariq Ramadan doesn't deal with. For example, Tariq Ramadan, also in this book, he doesn't deal with other areas that might come about. He doesn't postulate that there should be such a thing as a human Muslim, the global identity. His whole book is based upon to be a European Muslim. What about someone today when we say there is globalization? Why is this important? Because as we stated in the previous nights, our world, our paradigm is shifting. We've moved towards globalization. When we litter, when we damage this part of the earth, it damages the other part of the earth. When we destroy one part of the planet, it destroys another part of the planet. So as much as you want to call yourself a European Muslim, in terms of globalization, we're also responsible to the whole of mankind as well. Because it's not possible in Islam, legally, ethically, for me to destroy one part of my country when it's going to affect someone else in the world. So immediately my whole context begins to change. The way in which I see my relationship to the rest of mankind has to change. The way in which I identify myself also has to change. So now Tariq Ramadan comes with these points. The first question is this: which one comes first? Humanity or Islam? The global need or the need of my ummah? Which one comes first? The answer goes back to what we showed yesterday, from the Quran and from the treaty of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, where the Prophet says that his ummah is not a Muslim ummah. We showed you yesterday the hadith, and inshallah we can bring it up again now. Have a look at this hadith. This is called the first peace treaty in Medina. It is named as being the first constitution of Medina. The Holy Prophet of Islam brings together the Jews, the Christians, the Sabians, the Zoroastrians, and the Muslims, and brings them into a peace treaty, so that all of these different tribes and religions and sects may live together in harmony in the city of Medina.
He begins, this is the agreement which has been concluded by Rasulullah between the Muslims of the Quraysh and of Yathrib and those persons who have followed them and risen up with them for jihad. Part 1, Article 1. Is the Ummah Rasulullah and only Muslims? Or is the concept of an Ummah more than just the Muslim Ummah? What does the Prophet himself say? Not what does Tariq Ramadan say? Not what does this scholar say, and this Sheikh, and this Sayyid. What does Rasulullah himself say? The signatories to this agreement form one Ummah. The Ummah is not just the Ummah of Islam, Ummat al-Islamiyyah. The Ummah are all of those collectively that come together to make a better society, irrespective of your faith, irrespective of your creed, irrespective of your sect. At one level we can say there is a Shia Ummah. At another level we can say there is a Muslim Ummah. At another level we can say the Ummah is the entire humankind. But the first definition that the Prophet gave to the Ummah was when all sects, all faiths came together to make a productive community in Medina. This means that when we begin to analyze the question of where my loyalty lies, the whole question is wrong in itself. It's not about saying my loyalty is to Muslims but not to humankind. My loyalty is to Britain but not to Shiism, or to Muslims but not to this sect. All of these questions don't make sense. Because if you've understood the Prophet himself, whatever is truly Islamic is truly for the whole of humanity. Whatever is from the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam is truly for humanity. There should never be a conflict between the two of them. The moment you act properly in accordance with Quran and Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, it is in accordance with humanity. There won't be a conflict for you. The only conflict comes when we decide to say, should I put my national interest ahead of humanity? Do I want my country to do well at the expense of everyone else? Well, it's good for me. It's good for my economy. So long as Britain can continue to exploit the lesser economies, so what? I benefit. No, that's not allowed in Islam. That's the essential problem with nationalism, that says that these borders and everything in it is more important than the rest of the world. That's completely anti-Islam. Islam demands for us that we look after the entirety of humanity, and that through our religion and our madhab, it is always in accordance with that principle, not in contradiction to that principle. The moment someone comes to you and says, Hussein ibn Ali was not for mankind, Mahdi is not for mankind, Rasulullah was not for mankind, you know that they have misunderstood Islam altogether. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of all man, sustainer of all man, and He states within the Quran, I have not sent Rasulullah except as rahmatan lil alameen. Therefore, He is for the entirety of the universe, not just mankind. Therefore, how can Islam not be for the whole of mankind? How can Ahlul Bayt alayhi wasallam not be for all but of mankind? Therefore, our question that is asked is wrong. And the question that Tariq Ramadan asks is wrong. Am I Muslim first or French first? That's not the right question to ask. Is my religion supporting mankind, or is it prejudicing my own people first above mankind? If it prejudices my people, it's no different to nationalism. America first. Britain first. We have to protect our people. This is not mentioned in the Quran. This is not the way of the Holy Prophet of Islam. So when it comes to my identity, the question of Islam is the human endeavor and ensuring all of us come together, up, being lifted together. This is what we said yesterday in the conclusion with the hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi, where he says ma ummirat al-buldan illa bimithli adl, that nations cannot flourish unless there is justice between them. If you want to prejudice your people first above everybody else, then there cannot be justice between you. Your natural resources, the things God gave to you as a country, You will use them for your own benefit to the extent that you will prejudice it for your people against everybody else. What did we state in the Quran in those previous verses? Allah has vouchsafed you those things. He has given you those things, not for yourselves, for you to be able to utilize for everybody else. What is the biggest problem with Al Saud? All the wealth, all the hajjaj, all of the oil. It's not used for humanity. It's used to destroy the rest of the Muslim Ummah. Is that what we are? Is that what Islam was supposed to be? Trying to make all of the gifts of God and the rizq from God for the sake of our nation state? So that we can destroy Bahrain, we can destroy Yemen, we can destroy Qatar, destroy Lebanon, destroy, and then at the end of it, partner with the illegal and illegitimate regime of Zionism? Is this what Islam is? So either we have that context and identity about us looking insular, protecting our own people, or we see Islam as it ought to be, as it was supposed to be, which was to lift the whole of humanity towards a state of liberation and completion. Therefore, the next question follows back towards Tariq Ramadan and also to you and I tonight. When then should we take our Shi'i identity first, or our Muslim identity first? First, as we stated, as long as it's not in conflict with our human identity. Why? The goal of Islam, as we saw from the ayat of Quran, was what? Ummatan wahida. To bring us back to one human community. When we have multiple identities, two things happen. One, it divides us. And two, we become entrenched in our own identities, making the other person different from us. We other them. They are other than us. They don't belong to me, and I am better than you. So now imagine, we have Muslims here, we have Jews here, we have Christians here, we have Hindus here, we have Sikhs there. Because we hold on to those multiple identities first and foremost, before anything else, we are a collective human community. We could then merge together to become one whole, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defined for us to be in the first place. So what happens? Do I put my Shi'i identity, my Muslim identity, my Hindu identity, my Protestant identity, my Man United identity first? Which one comes first? The human identity must come first in order to unite us. But when does my secondary identity come first? When do I then say, I am Muslim first? As we stated, only when it conflicts. But it shouldn't conflict because Islam is for humanity. So then what happens? It happens when we need to learn about our own histories as a collective thinking community. And when we come together to remember our collective histories, the most important thing is never to lie about your own collective histories. This is the problem which was happening in Europe today at the moment. Europe is disintegrating before our eyes. And it is going back to a time where its nationalism is coming first, and it is coming to a time where racial warfare and ethnic warfare is coming back to the forefront. Why? Because the collective European identity is being shelved, and the concept of the white indigenous identity is taking superiority over the collective identity. France, Britain, Germany, Poland, Hungary, Sweden, Italy. What happens? We need to look after our own little people first. Doesn't matter whatever happens to anyone else, the brown folk, yellow folk, these people, those people, so long as my country comes first, we're happy. The problem is, in a globalized world and in a civilized world, that doesn't last very long. Because the problem with humans is, we end up killing one another. And the moment we go back into that identity conflict, whereby all of our rival identities take superiority over the collective human identity, we always go back towards war, we always go back towards massacre. There has not been a time in history where we have not done that. So for us tonight to conclude, we need to think about this question, which is this: what happens when a people consciously lie about their own identities and histories? The Quran has a multitude of verses which speak about this issue. And sometimes we forget how the Quran deals with these modern questions. We ignore it. But we have to start with the Quran to see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dealt with this subject primarily to two groups. One, the Arabs, and number two, to the faiths that existed in the Arab societies, primarily the Jews and the Christians, in the hope that they would realize their own histories. Now, have a look here inshallah with me in some of these ayat, and we will see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deals with this issue about being collectively and consciously aware of your own history and not lying about your own past in order to protect yourselves from damaging your future. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Chapter 105 of the Holy Quran and chapter 106 of the Holy Quran. Surah Al-Fil. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the story of the elephant. You all know it so well when Abraha went to come and destroy the Kaaba, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected his house, in which the birds with clay rocks or stones in their mouth used it to drop and pelt upon the elephants, which turned back from destroying the holy Kaaba. The question I ask you tonight about this is simple. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remind them of this? Were they not already aware of it? In which year did it take place? Which year did this incident take place? With the birth of whom? Who was born in this year? Am al-Fil. Who? Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Rasulullah announced his nubuwwat at what age? 40 years old. So the incident that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about is only 40 years past. Were they forgetful of this event? No, they knew it. But did it factor into their decision making? Did it factor into their consciousness that God existed, saved their Kaaba, and the only reason why they exist in that city is because Allah saved their city? Many of you have been to Mecca. It's a dry, barren land. Without Zamzam, without Kaaba, who could possibly live there? So the whole concept was, you as Quraysh are living in this area because of the Kaaba, because of Zamzam. And now you know in your collective memory that this incident took place. Therefore you know God exists, you know God protects you, you know Ibrahim and Ismail exist, salamullahi alayhima. Why then are you rejecting a prophet from your own people? So what does he do? He first reminds them about their own collective histories, so that they bring it to mind. They make themselves conscious of this. Alam tara kayfa, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Alam yaj'al kaydahum fi tadlil wa arsala alayhim tayran ababil. Have you not thought about, considered, reflected upon how your Lord dealt with the possessors of the elephant? What happened? He sent down to prey upon them the birds in flocks, casting stones of baked clay. What happened? He rendered them like straw eaten up. So, O Quraysh, remember your own history. Because if you don't remember your own history, you won't be able to take lesson from it. You won't factor it consciously as a community, and you'll just bypass it all. Now, even more interesting, in the next chapter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala follows this up. And this is very important. Imagine you are the Quraysh, and you're receiving these ayat. What's being told to you all along? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. لِإِلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ, for the unity of the Quraysh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them that all the Quraysh tribes have come together. You're united all together. Where are you united? Around Mecca. What is Mecca? The place that I, God, saved for you. Otherwise you would be a destroyed people, a desolate people. So, لِإِلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ, for the unity of the Quraysh. إِلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ. What do you want them to realize? That they actually are given safety and security for their caravans, their trade caravans that go around in the winter and in the summer. What does this mean? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was reminding the people of Quraysh that in the winter and the summer, you take your trade caravans. In the summer, you go towards Syria, where it's cooler. And in the winter, you go towards Yemen, where it's warmer for you. But I give you all of this with safety. Weren't you about to be destroyed 40 years ago by Abraha? I'm the one that saved you. I'm the one that gives you trade. I'm the one that gives you this free movement towards these different parts of Arabia. Allah then tells them, having now realized this, what should you do? فَلْيَعْبَدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. So now, worship the Lord of this house. Which house? The one that we saved for you with the story of Amr Fil. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concludes, الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. Allah is the one that has taken you out of this fear and hunger and desolation. I can turn you back into it anytime I want, as per the discussion of the end of civilizations. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts the discussion and says to the Quraysh, don't be ignorant of your histories. Don't allow yourselves to ignore your own past events. Collectively bring to mind the truthfulness. How many times has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the stories of the prophets from their own area? Hud, Salih, from their own areas. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them about what happened to them. The people of Nuh in Iraq, destroyed by the flood, time and time again. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings the same context to the Jews and Christians in Medina as well. Don't forget your own histories. Because the moment you forget your own histories, you will not allow yourselves to be truthful towards your own futures. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts, if we can bring the verses from Surah Al-Baqarah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Baqarah, verses 83 to 86, starts to tell Banu Israel, remember the covenant that you made with me. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ. What should you do? What's the covenant that Banu Israel made with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? لَا تَعْبَدُونَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا وَذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسْكِينِ وَقُولِ لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. Your whole covenant with God was what? You should not worship any but Allah. Do good towards your parents and to those who are around you and to the poor and so on and so forth. Speak good towards mankind. Next verse. And now he continues. وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَكُمْ لَا تَسْفِكُونَ دِمَاءَكُمْ وَلَا تُخْرِجُونَ أَنفُسَكُمْ مِنْ دِيَارِكُمْ. The covenant with the Jews was what? Don't shed blood and throw people out of their houses. There's an interesting article I encourage you all to read in the Huffington Post, which was titled, When Israel Remembers Its Covenant, They Will Be the Most Successful People in the World. What was the covenant that God made with Banu Israel? Do not shed blood and do not throw people out of their own houses. What happened in Palestine? Shedding of blood and throwing people out of their own houses. The HuffPost said, the moment Israel remembers its covenant with God, وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَكُمْ لَا تُخْرِجُونَ أَنفُسَكُمْ مِنْ دِيَارِكُمْ. Don't throw yourselves and people out of their own houses. You will become successful. What happens when you forget your own history? You can do anything. You can kill anyone. You can slaughter any people, as long as you forget your own past. This is what Europe is doing. The biggest problem with the Muslim community has been that it's forgotten its own history. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, the Imam of our brothers from Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, was once asked a question. This is mentioned in the books. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was asked a question. What is your opinion about Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan? Was Umar ibn Abdul Aziz better than him or not? Weren't all the kings of Banu Umayyah despots except Umar ibn Abdul Aziz? What's your opinion, Ya Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal? You know what he says? He responds by saying, Atukarimu sahabiyan bi rajulin min at-tabi'in? Do you really wish to compare a sahaba with someone from the tabi'in? How dare you ask me this question? Is Muawiyah better or is Umar ibn Abdul Aziz better? We don't talk about these things. We don't compare. We don't go into their histories. This was the downfall of the Muslim community because they rejected understanding their own history, rejected returning back to their books, rejected returning back to the Quran itself. And as a result, we could just make up and do whatever we wanted. The moment we remove these problems within ourselves, we'll have the ability to look back into history, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demanded from us. The problem in Europe today is the same as what the Muslim community is going through. It doesn't look into its own history. And in Europe, the segregation, the breakdown is happening in front of our eyes. And I want you to understand this because in our subject matter of saving our own civilization starts with this foundation of asking Europe to remember its own history, to look back into what it really did to itself. Because it is you and I, as minorities and as Muslims, that are the most threat. Just like our brethren, the Jewish community, were the most threat between 1930 and 1945, today the minority Muslim community is most at threat of being removed and being butchered in 2018 across Europe. And this has to be understood. How do we tackle this in terms of the downfall of this civilization? Number one, we have to remember our collective identity before our national identity. And number two, we have to go back into our own histories and help people to understand their histories. This is important. Right now, there is a whitewash, a complete whitewash of Europe's recent history by certain countries. I'm going to show you, inshallah, and tell you of the specifics that are happening. Right now, in certain countries, there is the forbiddance of bringing up what happened in their own histories. Especially in countries like Poland and in Hungary. Laws have come into place and the national identity and the national consciousness are working in a way that forgets what it did to the Jewish population, to the Roman population, and to the minorities in the 1930s and the 1940s. Why? Why is there a collective whitewashing of their own history from only 70 years ago? In order to remember a different history, which will then subsequently allow them to repeat their own history again. This is happening in front of our eyes. And this needs to be known by you so that we can talk properly with politicians, with leadership, bring people together as opposed to dividing people. For example, right now, in Poland, in January of this year, January of 2018, did you know there was a law that was passed forbidding anyone in Poland ascribing that Polish people massacred Jews in Poland between 35 and 45? It's illegal in Poland for you to say that Poland massacred Jews between World War II. Did you know, in one town, on one day, 18,000 Jews were massacred in Poland in World War II. But you can't talk about it. You know why you can't talk about it? Because then you remember it. if you can wipe it from your collective conscious, if you don't go back into your history and admit what happened in your history, you can just repeat it again and again and again. The same thing is happening in Hungary right now, whereby again they have taken down statues commemorating massacres of the Roman community, of the Jewish community, so that there's no way to mark that event from taking place in that area. Same thing happens in Wahhabi Arabia. You know what they did in Medina? Where the house of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam was, today, they built a toilet over it. Why? Why do you want to remove the remembrance of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam? What are you so afraid of? What happened in Jannat al-Baqiyah? Why are you so afraid of having a spot to mark where Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam are buried? What makes you so afraid of this history? In the same way, this is happening in Europe as well, country by country by country. Now, there are certain countries that are better than others in dealing with this. For example, in Germany, there is a term for the collective memory of what it has done and what it did in World War II. This is a conscious thing that is driven into the people in Germany to remember that they massacred people and started a war that cost 80 million lives in World War II. The purpose of that is so that they never do it again. It's taught in schools. Their history is taught to them. Do you know what the context is? That what it's taught to them? It makes them feel like they now have to atone for that and become, quote, the most moral people in the world. I ask a simple question. In which Muslim country's constitution and collective memory does it say our goal is to become the most moral people in the world? Name me one country. In Germany, the history that is taught to them about their own collective conscious, remembering the massacres that they created, is for the purpose of the achievement of what goal? To become the most moral community in the world. What happened? They took in 1 million refugees from Syria. True or not? How many refugees did Al Saud take in, despite the ones who financed Daesh? Not one. How many did Britain take in? 2,000. They pledged 20,000, despite sponsoring Daesh, despite being the financiers of Daesh, Jabhat al-Nusra, the white helmets. Britain brought in 2,000 refugees from Syria. How many has America taken in? But when you collectively aware and bring to mind your own history and the massacres you did of your own people, you will then allow yourselves not to make the same mistake again. Sure, there is right-wing insurgency in Germany, but you know what happens? People come out against it in larger numbers to stop it from happening. We don't want your kind. We don't want to go back to Hitler. Here, this needs to take place in our own countries as well. Muslims and non-Muslim countries. The first safeguard to the downfall of your own civilization, the self-destruction of your own people, is to remember your own history, because even the Quran shows us that that's what we need to do. In Britain, when the previous education secretary was in charge, you know what he said? He wants our histories to tell us more. He wants in school our histories to tell us about the greatness of the British Empire. So the kids here are going to grow up thinking that the British Empire was a good thing. So they'll learn about the massacres, but it will be good. Hundreds of millions of people colonized, but it's good, because it was done in the name of the British Empire. If you understand this, you will see that without us wrangling, dealing with our pasts, our histories, we will never be able to successfully move forward as a people. It's the same thing with me and you. If you go to a shrink, if you go for psychological help, if you have any problem, they force you to delve into your own history. Tell me about your relationship with your father. Tell me about your relationship with your mother. What's your earliest memory, childhood trauma? And you have to wrangle with your own past. And only once you wrangle with your past are you able to come forward. Have a look at this. In the same way, if we can go back to the slides, inshallah. If you have a look, I will conclude now with what happens in the United States of America. And I brought with me a slide, inshallah, to be able to show you the way some people in the US are writing about their own collective conscious and wrangling and dealing with their own problems or otherwise. In America, as you know, just like here, there's a big problem with dealing with race relations, isn't there? And you know, for example, those black athletes who are kneeling and not standing for the flag. Why? Because for them that flag represents inherent racism. Black youth are targeted disproportionately to white youth. And so long as there is systemic racism and systemic targeting of black youth, they will not rise for that flag, correct? Everybody knows about this. So now, because they are dealing with this situation, what happens with people like Fox News? What happens with the far right? What happens with the right wing? What do they say? They say you're disrespecting our military. You're disrespecting our flag. Our veterans didn't die so that you could protest against the flag. They obfuscate the reality of the protest. So what happens? Now, there was, thank you very much. Now, if we can carry on going down all the way to the last slides, inshallah. Now what happens is, and this is coming, I'll give you the context of this article, because it's very important for you to see what's happening across the West, the challenges that are taking place with wrangling with your own past. You can't deal with this systemic racism in the United States of America until you've dealt with what? American history. And where does American history start? It starts in two areas. One, massacring the native population. Number two, bringing black people over as slaves in their thousands, in their hundreds of thousands, to work on your plantations. Until you've accepted consciously as an entire country and wrangled with your past, the country cannot move forward. You will not deal with systemic racism. Now, having realized this, what happened was, a few months ago, you'll remember, maybe some of you don't, forgive me for saying this on this important pulpit, but Kanye West came out and supported Donald Trump. You may know this, you may not know this. So Kanye West comes out and says, Trump is the man, Trump is looking after blacks, Trump is the one to help blacks, Barack Obama never helped the blacks, Donald Trump is our master, Donald Trump is our Lord and Savior. Having said this, after Kanye West came out with this nonsense, an author for The Atlantic wrote a phenomenal response, and I'm just taking for you 2 lines and 2 paragraphs to tell you about dealing with collective consciousness of your pasts. When you don't deal with it, then your future only allows you to go back to that despotic time. It is hard, because what happened to America in 2016, meaning the Trump election, and the rising of white supremacy in France, and in Britain, and in Poland, in Sweden, in Italy, in Germany, in America, it is hard, because what happened to America in 2016 has long been happening to America. If you don't deal with white supremacy at its core, it's always going to bubble up and come around again. It has always been dealing with America. It's always been happening in America. Before there was in America, when the first Carib was bayoneted and the first African delivered up in chains. It is hard to express the depth of the emergency without bowing to the myth of past American unity, when in fact American unity has always been the unity of those who are about conquer and colonization. Unity of America has been premised on Indian killings, land grabs, noble internments of people, and the gallant General Lee, and all the South will rise, and all the racism that comes with it. If that's your context of unity, and then a black man refuses to salute the flag, you will say he's breaking our unity, but your unity was always based on racism in the first place. If your collective conscious about unity is based on racism and someone stands up against it, you'll be offended because you're offending my unity. But my unity has been based on the rape and pillage of this land in the first place. Is it surprising now that this black man doesn't salute the flag? The unity of the United States of America has always been premised on Indian killings, land grabs, internment, and the South shall rise. Here is a country that specializes in defining its own deviancy downward so that the criminal, the immoral, and the absurd become the baseline, so that even now, amidst the long tragedy and this lately disaster, the guardians of truth rally to the liar's flag. When you forget that Yazid ibn Muawiyah massacred children, took the daughters of Rasulullah as slaves, then you can call him Amir al-Mu'mineen. So long as you premise your own history falsely, you can make up whatever future you want. We're all wrangling with this, from Muslims to the nation states that we live in. We end up saluting the liar's flag, thinking that we have to defend the liar's flag because our unity has been based on that. Nothing is new here, the author says in The Atlantic. Nothing is new here, what's happening in the US. The tragedy is so old that even within it, there are actors like Kanye. Some who've chosen true resistance, and some like Kanye West, who, however blithely, has chosen to collaborate with white supremacy, with Donald Trump. We're going through the same issue in Europe. And unless we wrangle with our histories and the colonizations that took place in Britain, the racism that exists within the countries, banning the concept of even talking about the massacres of Jews in Poland and Hungary, it leaves us open to go back through that very same door again. And I tell you, it won't be the Jews that are massacred tomorrow. It'll be another minority. It won't be the Irish. It won't be the blacks. It'll be you and me. It will be the Muslims that are put in those internment camps. It'll be the Mexicans in America that are put into those internment camps, like they already are now. And it requires from us that the first way to deal with the rise and downfall of our civilization is one, collective unity. Your identity is the human identity first, because then you cannot be divided into race. You cannot be divided into religion, into sect. You cannot be destroyed, because we are human first. And the second is to wrangle with your histories. Tell people, remember colonization. Remember what happened when you dragged people here in chains. Remember when you massacred people only 70 years ago. Because if you don't, it'll happen again. And this is the first way to deal with the downfall of a civilization. Massacring children was something that the Arabs were used to. The Quran has many verses on this. What does it say? لا تقتلوا أولادكم. Do not kill your children. Why would the verses of Quran have to tell you this? Unless the Arabs were doing it in the first place. They would bury their newborn daughters alive. And if the girls managed to survive infanticide and being buried alive, then they were likely sold into prostitution, na'udhu billah, or they were just given away as brides for the purpose of just producing children. And the cycle went on. But male children sometimes were also killed. The Quran says, لا تقتلوا أولادكم خشية إملاق. Don't kill your children out of fear of poverty. نحن نرزقكم وإياهم. We will give rizq to you Same way we give rizq to them. We'll give rizq to them, same way we give rizq to you. The Arabs used to kill children. It was part and parcel of their culture. Islam was supposed to help them wrangle with that practice, with that culture, deal with it, and go past. So that no longer would they gleefully bay for the blood of children. On the 10th of Muharram, a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old stepped forward. Those same Arabs who are supposed to have wrangled with their history, read the Quran, known that this was their past, 50 years later after the death of Rasulullah, would come back to massacre the grand and great-grandchildren of Rasulullah. If you don't deal with your histories, you don't learn from them, you'll end up repeating. On the afternoon of the 10th of Muharram, the children of Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam would come again and again and again to Imam al-Hussein and say that we want to be able to fight for you. Aun and Muhammad, each time they would go towards Hussein ibn Ali, would be refused. You are children. How do I go and look Zainab, my sister, in the eye? How do I give away my own children, nephews, when the unsheathed swords are ready to bay for their blood? One of the stories says about the history of the Arabs that at the time of the battles of the Holy Prophet of Islam, an incident took place. Listen to this incident and how the Arabs were at the time of the Prophet and what they went back to at the time of Karbala. The narration says that during the battle of the Prophet, one of the battles, there was a water boy, and his job was that when one of the Muslims had been struck down, he would go to that person to feed them water in the last moments of their life, so that they died with their thirsts quenched. The narration says that one of the Sahaba of the Prophet was cut down, and another one, and another one. And there were 3 of the Ashab lying on the battlefield, stricken in their last moments. The water boy comes out, and he runs towards the first person. The first person says to him, "Don't give water to me. One of our friends is lying also on the battlefield. Give him water first." So the water boy runs from the first to the second. He gives him the water. The man says, "Don't give water to me. One of our friends is lying on the battlefield stricken. Give water to him." He runs to the third, and the third says, "Don't give water to me. Go back to the first and give water to him." The water boy arrives back at the first and finds that person has returned to his Lord. He runs to the second, he finds the second has died thirsty. He runs to the third, he finds the third has died thirsty. Each one of them died thirsty for the sake of the other one. But it was within their practice that they should not die thirsty. That they should be allowed to have a drop of water before they are killed. The Arabs had gone so much backwards into their own practices, so much hatred because of their loyalties towards their tribes, that they were willing to kill the grandsons of Rasulullah for the sake of their own tribes. When Hussein ibn Ali goes out into the battlefield, he says, "Am I not the grandson of Rasulullah?" They said, "Yes, you are." He says, "Am I not the son, or am I not the nephew of Hamza?" They said, "Yes, you are." "Am I not the one who is the son of Jaffer, who has wings, who flies in heaven?" They said, "Yes, you are." "Is my grandmother not Khadija?" They said, "Yes." He says, "Is it not that my mother is Fatima?" They said, "Yes." He says, "Why do you kill me then?" We kill you because of our hatred of your father, Ali ibn Abi Talib. We want Banu Umayyah to rise. When Awn and Muhammad came towards Aba Abdullah, they would say to him, "O Aba Abdullah, our uncle, allow us to enter into the battlefield." By this time, Akbar had already been killed. It was something of a hurt to Sayyida Zainab to see that the son of Hussein was given first before her own children. She would come to Awn and Muhammad and say, "Go, how is it that you're still standing here in the tents? Go and die for your uncle Aba Abdullah. Akbar has already died. Akbar lies in the tent with his chest ripped open from a spearhead. Why do I still see you, Awn and Muhammad, with me now?" Awn and Muhammad would continuously go to Aba Abdullah and he would continuously refuse. Eventually Zainab herself had to come towards Aba Abdullah and say, "Oh my brother, do you allow me to be embarrassed in front of our mother Fatima on the day of judgment? Do you allow me to stand in front of her and she will say, 'Why did you not give your sons to protect my Hussein?'" At this point, Hussein says, "What about your husband, Abdullah bin Jaffer? He may not want his sons to go into the battle." At this point, Hussein responds by saying, Zainab alayhi salam responds by saying, "It is the decree of Abdullah that he wants his sons to be given in your way." At this moment, Hussein cannot say any more. At this moment, Hussein gives his permission and allows Awn and Muhammad to enter. The narrations tell us that Zainab dresses Awn and Muhammad herself. I ask you a question: how does a mother dress a 10 and 12-year-old son for battle, knowing that the next time she sees her children, their bodies will be cut to pieces, that their bodies will be torn, that their bodies will be dragged upon the plains of Karbala? But Zainab does this with pride. Zainab places them in her own arms and says, "I do not wish to see you until you have given yourself for Aba Abdullah." At this point, they exit towards the battlefield. The narration tells us that Umar ibn Sa'ad calls out and he says, "What love Zainab has for Aba Abdullah in order to sacrifice her children for him." If Umar ibn Sa'ad recognizes this, why did Umar ibn Sa'ad understand that he himself would be on that path? Should be on that path. He says, what love Zainab has for Hussein in order to sacrifice her own children for Aba Abdullah. It is said that these two brave warriors stick together in order to fight against the enemies. They are surrounded by the enemies, and every time one of them comes forward to attack either Awn or Muhammad, Awn and Muhammad assist each other. They go and fight in a way that they are back to back. Many of the enemies come forward and try to attack. Awn and Muhammad kill the enemies as they are coming round them. Eventually there is a call from within the ranks of Yazid's army. He says, if you want to be able to defeat these two young lions, separate them. Do not allow them to work together. Do not allow them to be back to back. At this point, the army of Yazid worked to separate Awn and Muhammad. It is said that as they are separated, they are surrounded. So there is two circles around Awn and Muhammad. I wonder at this moment, how does a 10-year-old feel being surrounded? At least before, when people were attacking him, he had his elder brother to assist him. Now he's calling out and saying, "Oh Awn, are you okay?" Muhammad is calling out, "Are you okay?" Awn is calling out, "Where are you, my brother? Can you come back and assist me?" It is said that as they are surrounded, this is when the avalanche went towards them. They threw everything at them. They hurled their spearheads. They hurled arrows at them. They hit them with swords, such that eventually it was Awn the elder who fell towards the ground. Muhammad would fall towards the ground. I wonder at this moment if at the time of Rasulullah the battle was stopped so that you were able to give water. What had these Arabs become that they could not give water to Awn and Muhammad? If it was that time where the Muslims would say, let me have my other companion looked after. Imagine the love that Awn had for Muhammad in that moment. Imagine the love that Muhammad had for Awn in that moment. That had there been any consolation, he would have said, please look after my brother first. Some of our Dhakireen tell us that this is what happened between Awn and Muhammad, that Abu Abdullah came out. As he came out, he heard the call from these two young children, Assalamu alayka ya Abu Abdullah. He comes towards Awn. He sees that Awn's body has been torn to pieces, struck again by the swords. He sits down beside his nephew and says, oh Awn, what has happened to you? Awn would have said, oh Abu Abdullah, go and look after my brother Muhammad first. I don't want you to look after me whilst my brother is lying alone on the plains of Karbala. And you can imagine that Hussein would have gone towards Muhammad, and Muhammad, the younger brother, would have said, oh Abu Abdullah, look after my elder brother Awn first, because I heard that he was struck. I heard the way in which he cried out when he was hit. Both of these two young brothers were killed in this way. The narration tells us that Abu Abdullah dragged their bodies along the ground, bringing them back towards the tents. At this moment, the women come out of the tents. They are looking towards the children of Zainab. They are looking towards the children of Rasulullah. What do they see? They see Awn and Muhammad's bodies cut to pieces. They call out, Wa Awna, Wa Muhammada, Wa Aliya, Wa Muhammada. What has happened to you, Awn and Muhammad? They are slapping their faces. They are hugging the bodies of their nephews. They are hugging the bodies of these two broken children's bodies. But they are looking around, and amongst them, they do not see Zainab crying. They do not see Zainab crying out for her two sons. They look around and they go back into the tent. We are told that they find Zainab in sajda, saying, Alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah who allowed me to sacrifice my children in the way of Abu Abdullah. We are told that Zainab says that she will not cry for her own two sons. Why? Because she does not want Imam al-Hussein to feel heartbroken. She does not want to hurt the heart of Hussein and imagine that Hussein feels sorry for Zainab. So Zainab only cries for Abbas. Zainab cries for Akbar. Zainab cries for Sakina. But Zainab does not cry for Awn and Muhammad. Throughout the entirety of the journey, Zainab had to see the severed heads of her two young sons. The heads of Awn and Muhammad were strapped towards the horse. They were placed upon spears, and every time that they were taken towards different cities, they would hurl stones at the heads of the shuhada. At this moment, Zainab has to see the heads of her two sons having stones hurled at them. Still, Zainab does not cry for Awn and Muhammad. Eventually, they come back towards the city of Medina. It is said that Zainab goes back in towards that house. At this point, as she enters, her husband turns towards her and says, oh lady, who are you that is coming into my house? Lady, you cannot be in my room, you cannot be in my house. Which stranger are you that I have not seen you before? At this point, Zainab, whose face has changed, her hair has changed, her back has become bent, she has been whipped, Zainab has been lashed, Zainab is the one to be paraded from city to city. She turns towards her husband and says, oh Abdullah, do you not recognize your own wife Zainab? Has it been so long that you don't recognize Zainab? This is what happened. Let me tell you what has happened to Awn and Muhammad. Let me tell you what has happened to your two children. We are told by our Dhakireen that in that room there was two small sajjada. There was two small prayer mats where Awn and Muhammad used to recite their salah. When Zainab sees those two sajjada, this is when Zainab first cries for her son Awn and Muhammad. We say to you tonight, oh Zainab, you didn't cry for Awn and Muhammad, but we will cry for your two sons, Awn and Muhammad. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. ماتم حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين.
Inshallah, brothers, come close for Matam, inshallah. Oh, Karbala, Karbala, Karbala. Oh, Karbala, Karbala, Karbala.